Good evening, dear listeners. As you settle into your cozy space, I invite you to take a deep, soothing breath in, and then gently release it, letting go of the day's worries. Welcome to this tranquil journey through time, where we will explore the fascinating yet often overlooked topic of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards. This soothing narrative is designed to ease you into a state of relaxation, lulling you towards a peaceful slumber while providing gentle insights into a significant aspect of ancient culture. In the hushed whispers of history, the ancient Egyptians stand out as masters of preservation, skillfully intertwining the sacred with the scientific. Their elaborate mummification processes not only preserved their deceased but also reflected their beliefs, values, and an enduring quest for immortality. Yet, amid the grand rituals and elaborate tombs, there exists a more subtle, even dull aspect of this practice: the standards and materials used in the creation of mummification bandages. Tonight, we will delve deeply into this seemingly mundane topic, illuminating how the Egyptians' careful attention to detail and bandage standards played a crucial role in their funerary practices. As we begin this soothing exploration, we will first take a moment to understand the significance of mummification in ancient Egyptian society. We will gently unravel the beliefs surrounding the afterlife, which drove the meticulous care in preparing the deceased for their journey beyond the physical realm. With a calm and steady voice. Next, we will slip into a serene description of the bandaging techniques employed by the ancient embalmers. Picture skilled hands wrapping the bodies with layers upon layers of soft linen, each fold and tuck a testament to the care and reverence held for the departed. We will explore how the bandaging process varied over time and across different regions, reflecting the evolving standards and practices that, while dull in appearance, were pivotal in the preservation of the body. As we drift further into this soft narrative, we will encounter the various rituals associated with mummification, paying special attention to how the bandages were imbued with spiritual significance. You will hear whispers of the prayers and incantations that accompanied the wrapping process, creating a serene atmosphere that enveloped the deceased in comfort and protection. As we continue, we will explore the impact of these standards on modern archaeology and our understanding of ancient Egyptian culture. You may find it fascinating how even the most mundane aspects of life hold keys to unlocking the mysteries of a civilization long gone. And as we near the end of our gentle exploration, we will reflect on the enduring legacy of these mummification practices, considering how they continue to captivate our imagination and inspire a sense of wonder about our own mortality. So, dear listeners, as we embark on this tranquil voyage through the history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards, allow yourself to sink deeper into relaxation. Let the soft cadence of my voice guide you, like a gentle river flowing through the sands of time. Each word is a step towards rest, and each moment we share is a step closer to serenity. Now, let us begin our journey into the soothing depths of history, where even the dullest of topics can reveal the extraordinary. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the tales of ancient Egypt wrap around you like the tender bandages of time. The history of mummification in ancient Egypt, particularly the standards for bandaging, spans several millennia and is a subject that, while seemingly mundane, offers a wealth of information regarding the funerary practices and administrative procedures of one of history's most enduring civilizations. The earliest recorded instances of mummification in Egypt can be traced back to the pre-dynastic period, approximately 5000 BCE, when the inhabitants of the Nile Valley began to bury their dead in shallow graves. These early burials often involved the simple practice of placing the body in a pit, which was then covered with sand. The dry climate of the region contributed to natural desiccation, which preserved the bodies to a degree. However, it was not until the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BCE, that more systematic practices of mummification began to emerge. One of the earliest known figures in the history of mummification is King Narmer, circa 3150 BCE, who is often credited with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. While there are no direct records detailing the mummification practices during his reign, the significance of his burial and the subsequent treatment of the deceased in Egyptian society suggests that the practice was becoming increasingly ritualized. Narmer's tomb, located at Hierakonpolis, featured a burial chamber constructed of mud brick, indicative of the architectural advancements during this time. The tomb itself, however, lacked the elaborate mummification techniques that would come to define later periods. During the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, the practice of mummification underwent significant evolution. The introduction of the First Intermediate Period, circa 2181 to 2055 BCE, saw a decline in centralized power, which consequently led to variations in burial practices across different regions. Nonetheless, it was during the Old Kingdom that the standards for mummification began to be codified. One of the most notable mummification practices from this period involved the use of natron, a naturally occurring salt that was used to desiccate the body and prevent decay. According to the writings of Herodotus, a Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, the process involved the removal of internal organs, which were often stored in canopic jars. The embalming process typically took around 70 days, during which the body was covered with natron to absorb moisture. The funerary texts of this period, particularly the pyramid texts, provide insight into the rituals surrounding mummification and the expectations for the deceased in the afterlife. The architectural developments of this era, especially the construction of the pyramids, reflected the growing complexity of burial practices. The Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, designed by the architect Imhotep, is one of the earliest examples of monumental stone architecture and illustrates the importance placed on the afterlife. By the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, there was a marked increase in the sophistication of mummification techniques. The administrative procedures surrounding mummification became more formalized, with specialized embalmers emerging as a distinct class. The role of these individuals was critical. They were highly regarded for their knowledge of the human body and the embalming process. The establishment of standards for mummification bandages became increasingly important, as these materials were integral to the preservation of the body. By the reign of Amenemhat II, circa 1929 to 1895 BCE, evidence suggests that linen bandages were being used extensively to wrap the bodies of the deceased. The linen was typically made from flax, which was cultivated along the fertile banks of the Nile. The quality of the linen, as well as the manner in which it was applied, became a matter of considerable importance. The bandaging process itself was both laborious and ritualistic. The embalmers would often apply layers of resin between the bandages to enhance preservation. The daily routines of embalmers were highly regimented. Embalmers were often required to adhere to strict schedules dictated by the administrative authorities overseeing the funerary practices. This included the preparation of the embalming materials, the application of natron and resin, and the careful wrapping of the body in linen. The procedures were codified into a series of guidelines, which likely varied by region but were generally consistent across the powerful necropolises of the time, including Thebes and Memphis. The adornment of the mummified bodies with amulets and other funerary items became commonplace during the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE. This period also saw the emergence of the concept of mummy masks, which became an integral part of the burial ensemble. The use of bandages was refined, with standards established for the number of layers to be applied and the specific types of linen to be utilized. The reign of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, circa 1332 to 1323 BCE, is particularly noteworthy for its insight into the standards of mummification during the New Kingdom. His tomb, discovered intact in 1922 by Howard Carter, contained an impressive array of bandaging materials. The wrappings of Tutankhamun's body were made from fine linen, expertly layered and adorned with gold leaf, reflecting not only the high status of the individual but also the advanced techniques of the time. Administrative procedures related to mummification continued to evolve, with embalmers likely operating under the auspices of state-sponsored organizations. The regulation of materials used for bandages became a matter of governmental oversight, as the quality of linen and the use of resins were carefully monitored. Records from this time suggest that there were indeed standards in place regarding the dimensions of bandages, which were typically several yards in length and varied in width, depending on the specific needs of the embalmers. The late period, c. 664 to 332 BCE, presented a resurgence of interest in traditional practices, including mummification. However, it also introduced variations influenced by external cultures, particularly during the period of Persian domination. The standards for bandaging, while largely maintained, began to reflect a degree of eclecticism. The embalmers of this time had to adapt to new materials and techniques, possibly incorporating foreign fabrics and resins into their practices. With the advent of the Greco-Roman period, the standards for mummification bandages experienced further alterations. Egyptian practices began to merge with those of the Hellenistic world, and the traditional techniques of bandaging were influenced by new artistic styles and materials. The use of linen continued, but there were indications that other textiles were employed, leading to a diversification of wrapping techniques. The decline of the traditional mummification practices can be traced to the rise of Christianity in Egypt, which began to supplant the ancient customs. By the 4th century CE, the standards for mummification bandaging had largely been abandoned as the focus shifted from preserving the body for the afterlife to the spiritual salvation of the soul. The last significant remnants of mummification practices faded by the 7th century CE, marking the end of an era that had lasted for thousands of years. In conclusion, the history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards is a reflection of the broader cultural, administrative, and spiritual practices of one of history's most fascinating civilizations. From the rudimentary burials of the pre-dynastic period to the elaborate mummification techniques of the New Kingdom, the evolution of bandaging practices reveals not only the technical advancements of the time but also the significance of the afterlife in ancient Egyptian society. While the subject may seem tedious and monotonous, it remains an integral aspect of understanding the ancient Egyptian worldview and their complex relationship with death and the afterlife. The construction methods and materials utilized in the production of mummification bandages in ancient Egypt exhibit a remarkable degree of standardization, reflecting both the cultural significance of the practice and the practicalities involved. The bandages were predominantly made from linen, a textile derived from the flax plant, Linum usitatissimum, which was cultivated extensively along the banks of the Nile River. The cultivation of flax dates back to at least 5000 BCE, with evidence suggesting that it was a staple crop by the time of the early dynastic period, circa 3150 to 2613 BCE. The linen used for mummification bandages was typically woven to a fine count, with threads measuring approximately 0.5 millimeters in diameter. The construction of these bandages involved a meticulous process, where the flax fibers were harvested, soaked, and processed into yarn. The weaving technique employed during the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, required skilled artisans to create sheets of linen that could range in size from 1.5 meters to 2.5 meters in width and length. The final product was often bleached to a pristine white, achieved through a combination of sunlight exposure and the use of natron, a naturally occurring salt. Maintenance procedures for mummification bandages were equally rigorous. After the bandaging process, which could take several days depending on the condition of the deceased, the bandages were treated with a mixture of resins and oils. This combination served multiple purposes. It provided an antiseptic barrier against decay, conferred a pleasant aroma, and aided in the preservation of the linen itself. The use of myrrh, Commiphora myrrha, and cedar oil, Cedrus libani, was particularly common, with these substances being applied in layers over the bandages. The financial records pertaining to the production and application of mummification bandages are sparse but provide an illuminating glimpse into the economic aspects of funerary practices. During the New Kingdom period, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the costs associated with mummification were meticulously documented in various administrative texts, such as the Medinet Habu inscription, which lists expenditures for funerary supplies. The costs of linen alone could range from 10 to 20 deben, a unit of weight approximately equivalent to 91 grams, for sufficient material to wrap a single adult body. This financial burden was typically borne by the family of the deceased, often involving a considerable portion of their wealth. The personnel involved in the mummification process included a range of specialists, each with specific job descriptions. The primary figure was the embalmer, known as the Wab priest, who was responsible for the overall process of mummification. This individual was usually a man of considerable training, often possessing knowledge of anatomy, chemistry, and religious rituals. The embalmer's duties included extracting internal organs, treating the body with natron for desiccation, and overseeing the application of bandages. Supporting the embalmer were a cadre of assistants, whose roles varied from preparing the materials to conducting ritualistic rites. For instance, the sacred scribe documented the process, ensuring that all steps were recorded in accordance with religious customs. The bandager, a specialized role, focused exclusively on the application of linen strips, often requiring the ability to create intricate patterns. This role was vital, as the manner in which the bandages were applied could affect both the aesthetic appearance of the mummy and its preservation. Technical specifications of mummification bandages were governed by a blend of cultural tradition and empirical knowledge. Bandages were typically applied in a systematic manner, starting from the feet and progressing upward to the head, with each layer being secured tightly to prevent any potential movement of the linen. The thickness of the bandages could vary, but most layers were approximately 0.5 centimeters thick, with some instances of additional padding being inserted in areas of anatomical significance, such as the abdomen and chest. In the late period of ancient Egypt, around 664 to 332 BCE, the standardization of bandage application saw the introduction of additional layers incorporating decorative elements, such as painted images and inscriptions of protective spells. These embellishments, while intended to enhance the protective qualities of the bandages, also served as an expression of the social status of the deceased. More affluent individuals often received more elaborate bandaging techniques, including the use of golden thread interwoven with linen. The maintenance of these bandages after the initial mummification process was crucial for ensuring the longevity of the mummy. Once the body was placed in its sarcophagus, periodic assessments were likely undertaken to monitor the condition of the linen. Records indicate that specialized priests were appointed to oversee tomb maintenance, which included checking for signs of decay or infestation. Such rituals may have involved the reapplication of oils or the replacement of deteriorating bandaging sections, reflecting a continuous commitment to the preservation of the deceased. Financial accounts from this period also highlight the substantial costs associated with high-quality linen and the expertise of embalmers. Notably, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II, circa 1279 to 1213 BCE, the expense of mummification was recorded as part of the royal budget, which allocated a significant sum, approximately 2,000 deben, specifically for funerary practices, including bandage production. This investment underscores the importance of mummification in royal and elite contexts, as it was seen as a necessary expenditure for ensuring a successful passage to the afterlife. As for the technical aspects of the linen itself, it is worth noting that variations in quality could be observed. The finest linens, known as fine weave, were produced with a thread count of upwards of 100 threads per square inch, while coarser linens might have a count as low as 40 threads per square inch. These differences not only impacted the price but also the overall preservation qualities of the bandages. In conclusion, the dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards encapsulates a range of construction methods and materials, maintenance procedures, financial records, personnel roles, and technical specifications. While the topic may appear monotonous upon first glance, it reveals the intricate and methodical nature of a practice that held profound significance in the ancient Egyptian worldview. The interplay between economic considerations, skilled craftsmanship, and religious belief systems underscores the complexity of mummification as an art form and a ritualistic necessity that transcended mere preservation, functioning instead as a vital link between the mortal and the divine. The construction methods and materials utilized in the production of mummification bandages in ancient Egypt exhibit a remarkable degree of standardization, reflecting both the cultural significance of the practice and the practicalities involved. The bandages were predominantly made from linen, a textile derived from the flax plant, Linum usitatissimum, which was cultivated extensively along the banks of the Nile River. The cultivation of flax dates back to at least 5000 BCE, with evidence suggesting that it was one of the first plants domesticated for fiber production. This early agricultural practice laid the groundwork for the sophisticated textile techniques that would develop over millennia and become essential to mummification. The process of transforming flax into linen involved several meticulous steps, which were well established by the time of the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE. After harvesting the flax, the plants were repped, a process where the stalks were soaked in water to loosen the fibers. Once the fibers were separated from the woody stalks, they were spun into threads using a spindle whorl. This method allowed for the production of fine, strong threads, essential for creating the durable bandages used in mummification. By around 3000 BCE, the Egyptians had developed looms capable of weaving these threads into linen sheets of various widths, which could then be cut into strips for wrapping the bodies. The quality of linen used in mummification varied, with higher status individuals often wrapped in multiple layers of fine linen, while the lower classes might have used coarser materials. For instance, during the reign of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, circa 1332 to 1323 BCE, his tomb revealed over 100 meters of linen bandages, intricately layered and beautifully adorned, showcasing the high craftsmanship involved. The bandages were typically about 10 to 15 centimeters wide, allowing for a secure yet flexible wrap around the body, which was crucial for the preservation process. In addition to linen, other materials were sometimes incorporated into the bandaging process. Resins, oils, and even plant materials were applied between layers to enhance preservation and combat decay. For example, the use of cedar oil was common, believed to have antiseptic properties that would help protect the body during the afterlife. The application of these substances often occurred in a ritualistic manner, emphasizing the spiritual significance of the act. The mummification process itself, which could last anywhere from 70 days to several months, involved careful drying of the body using natron, a naturally occurring salt that effectively dehydrated the tissues while preventing decay. Historical context plays a crucial role in understanding mummification practices. From the early dynastic period through to the late period, approximately 3100 BCE to 332 BCE, the Egyptians refined their techniques in response to evolving religious beliefs and social structures. Initially, the burial practices were simple, with bodies placed in shallow graves. However, as the belief in an afterlife became more pronounced, the methods became increasingly elaborate. The construction of monumental tombs, such as the pyramids at Giza around 2580 to 2560 BCE, reflects this shift in funerary practices, with mummification becoming a vital aspect of ensuring the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. The standardization of mummification bandages also indicates a societal consensus on the importance of preserving the body for eternity. With the rise of the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, the process became a regulated craft, with specialized embalmers trained in the intricate techniques necessary for preparing the dead. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and texts, became widely used during this period, guiding the deceased through the afterlife, further emphasizing the belief in a continuation beyond death. The significance of mummification and its associated practices extended beyond the individual. It was a reflection of the entire society's values, its spirituality, its relationship with the divine, and its understanding of life and death. By the end of the Ptolemaic period, c. 305 to 30 BCE, the practice had reached new heights of complexity, incorporating influences from Greek and other cultures, while still adhering to the core principles established thousands of years prior. In conclusion, the methods and materials used in the creation of mummification bandages in ancient Egypt represent a blend of practical craftsmanship and profound cultural beliefs. From the cultivation of flax to the ritualistic processes surrounding mummification, every step was imbued with significance, ensuring that the deceased were honored and prepared for their journey into the afterlife. The construction methods and materials employed in the production of mummification bandages were characterized by a systematic approach, reflecting the meticulous nature of ancient Egyptian funerary practices. The primary material used for bandaging was linen, derived from the fibers of the flax plant, Linum eusitatissimum, which was cultivated extensively along the banks of the Nile River. The linen was processed through a series of steps that included retting, drying, and spinning, ultimately resulting in a textile of varying thread counts and widths. During the Third Dynasty, circa 2686 to 2613 BCE, the standard length of linen strips for mummification was typically around 2.5 to 3 meters, though some records indicate that longer strips measuring up to 5 meters were occasionally employed for larger individuals. The width of these strips varied, but most commonly measured between 10 to 15 centimeters. The linen was bleached using natron and water to achieve a bright white color, which was believed to symbolize purity and was considered essential for the deceased's journey through the afterlife. The maintenance of mummification bandages was a critical aspect of the overall mummification process. Once the linen had been prepared, it was stored in a designated area within the embalming workshop, usually constructed of mud brick and located in close proximity to the burial site. The workshop, referred to as a pernefer, was often maintained at a consistent temperature to prevent the linen from deteriorating, as high humidity levels could lead to mold growth. Regular inspections were conducted every 30 days to ensure that the bandages remained in pristine condition. The linen was often treated with an oil derived from the seeds of the castor bean plant, which served to further preserve the material. Financial records from the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, provide insight into the costs associated with the procurement and maintenance of bandaging materials. The average cost of a single meter of high-quality linen was approximately 1 devon, equivalent to 91 grams of silver, while lower-grade linen was available at a rate of 0.5 devon per meter. Given that an average mummy required approximately 20 to 30 meters of bandages, the total expenditure for linen alone could range from 20 to 30 deben. Additional costs included the purchase of natron for preservation, which could add another 5 deben to the overall budget. Families of the deceased often had to budget extensively for these expenses, as proper mummification was considered essential for ensuring the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. Personnel involved in the mummification process were highly specialized and included various roles, each with distinct job descriptions. The chief embalmer, known as the WOB, was responsible for overseeing the entire mummification process, including the preparation of the body and the application of the bandages. This individual typically underwent extensive training, often starting as an apprentice in their early teenage years and advancing through hands-on experience. The WOB was often assisted by a team of embalmers, who specialized in different aspects of the process. For example, one individual might be tasked with the extraction of internal organs, while another would focus on the application of resin to the bandages. Additional personnel included the sesh, or scribe, who maintained meticulous records of the materials used and the costs incurred during the mummification process. The sesh would document each stage of the procedure, including dates and quantities of materials, ensuring accountability and transparency. It was not uncommon for the records to reflect variations in pricing based on the quality of materials used, further emphasizing the importance of meticulous financial oversight. Technical specifications for mummification bandages were governed by a blend of tradition and innovation. The bandages were typically layered, with the innermost layers often being tighter and more intricately wrapped around the body, while subsequent layers were applied more loosely. The application technique varied based on the status of the deceased. For instance, royalty might have up to 25 layers of bandages, while commoners might receive only 15 layers. The use of resin to coat the bandages was a later development, emerging prominently during the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE. This resin, derived from the sap of certain trees, served to create a waterproof barrier, enhancing preservation. In terms of measurement, the bandage thickness varied depending on the number of layers applied and the materials used. Typically, the combined thickness of the bandages could range from 1 to 2 centimeters. Bandaging techniques were often standardized, with embalmers employing specific patterns to ensure uniformity. For instance, the initial wraps around the limbs would usually follow a diagonal pattern, while the torso would be wrapped in a more horizontal manner. The process of applying bandages was highly ritualistic, and various prayers and incantations were recited throughout the procedure to invoke divine protection for the deceased. The opening of the mouth ceremony, which allowed the deceased to speak in the afterlife, was often performed prior to the final wrapping of the mummy. This ceremony involved the use of tools specifically designed for the task, including a small adze, known as the mouthed adze, which symbolically opened the deceased's mouth. Overall, the dull yet intricate history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards reveals a meticulous approach to funerary practices, wherein each element was carefully considered and executed. The significance of linen as a material, the protocols for maintenance, the financial implications of mummification, the delineation of labor among personnel, and the technical specifications of bandaging techniques all contributed to a comprehensive system that has endured through centuries of study. The standardization of bandaging practices continued to evolve, with ancient texts from the Ptolemaic period, circa 332 to 30 BCE, indicating a growing emphasis on consistency and quality. These texts often included detailed diagrams and descriptions of the optimal wrapping techniques, reflecting a desire for precision that characterized late-stage mummification practices. In summary, the seemingly mundane aspects of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards provide a window into the broader cultural, financial, and technical frameworks that governed one of history's most enduring practices. The legacy of these standards continues to inform modern understanding of ancient Egyptian funerary customs, underscoring the significance of ritual, respect for the deceased, and the quest for immortality that defined this remarkable civilization. The construction methods and materials employed in the production of mummification bandages were characterized by a systematic approach, reflecting the meticulous nature of ancient Egyptian funerary practices. The primary material used for bandaging was linen, derived from the fibers of the flax plant, Linum eusitatissimum, which was cultivated extensively along the banks of the Nile River. The linen was processed through a series of steps that included retting, drying, and spinning, ultimately resulting in the fine, durable fabric that would be used to wrap the deceased. The process began with the harvest of flax, which typically occurred from March to May, coinciding with the inundation of the Nile. Farmers would cut the plants, allowing them to lie in the field to dry for a few days. Following this, the retting process commenced, where the flax stalks were submerged in water or left exposed to dew, facilitating the separation of the fibers from the woody stem. This step could take several days, depending on environmental conditions, before the fibers were extracted, washed, and dried. Once dried, the flax fibers were spun into threads, an activity that often took place in homes or workshops. Spinning wheels, simple devices that allowed for the continuous twisting of fibers, were employed to create threads of varying thicknesses. The finer threads were typically reserved for high-quality linen, which was essential for mummification. The Egyptians were known for their expertise in this craft, producing linen that was both soft and strong, suitable for the delicate process of wrapping mummies. For example, the linen used in the mummification of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, who reigned from 1332 to 1323 BCE, was of exceptional quality. Archaeological studies of his tomb, discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, revealed layers of linen bandages wrapped around the body, some of which were intricately embroidered with gold threads and adorned with various symbols. This not only demonstrated the high status of the individual but also the advanced textile techniques of the time. The application of bandages during the mummification process itself was highly ritualistic and methodical. The embalming process, which began shortly after death, involved the removal of internal organs, which were often preserved separately in canopic jars. The body would then be treated with natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture used for desiccation, after which it would be wrapped in layers of linen bandages. This part of the process could take up to 70 days, during which priests would recite prayers and perform rituals to ensure the safe passage of the deceased to the afterlife. Additionally, the layering of bandages was not merely for protection, each layer had its own significance. For instance, the first layers might be treated with oils and resins, which served to preserve the body and also provided a fragrant element for the deceased. The final layers were often designed to create a specific shape, resembling the human form, sometimes even with embellishments such as amulets placed between the layers to ward off evil spirits. Historically, the practice of mummification evolved over centuries, with the earliest known examples dating back to around 3500 BCE, during the pre-dynastic period. As Egyptian society transitioned into the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, the methods became increasingly sophisticated, with the introduction of more elaborate burial practices and the use of pyramid tombs. By the time of the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, and the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, mummification had become a highly developed art form, with extensive rituals and specialized craftsmen involved in the process. In summary, the construction methods and materials used in the creation of mummification bandages were not only practical in nature but were also deeply embedded in the cultural and spiritual fabric of ancient Egypt. The use of linen, processed through a meticulous series of steps, combined with the ritualistic application of bandages, illustrates the ancient Egyptians' profound reverence for the afterlife and their dedication to preserving the body for eternity. This systematic approach to mummification reflects a civilization that placed immense importance on life after death, shaping their beliefs and practices for millennia. The construction methods and materials employed in the mummification process were pivotal to the preservation of the body and the adherence to the established bandage standards of ancient Egyptian society. The primary materials utilized included linen, resin, and natron. Linen was the predominant choice for bandaging, as it was readily available and provided a degree of flexibility and breathable protection for the deceased. Commonly, the linen was derived from the flax plant, which was cultivated extensively along the Nile River, especially in regions such as the Fayum Oasis. The production of linen involved several stages, including the harvesting of flax, retting, and spinning. The flax fibers were soaked in water to loosen them from the stalk, a process known as retting, which typically took place over a period of several days. After retting, the fibers were dried, spun into thread, and woven into cloth. The quality of linen was often assessed based on its fineness, measured in threads per inch. High-quality linen could boast up to 80 threads per inch, while coarser varieties ranged from 30 to 50 threads per inch. The use of high-quality linen was particularly reserved for the mummification of pharaohs and nobility, whereas commoners might receive bandages of lesser quality. Resin was another significant component in the mummification process, serving both as an adhesive and a preservative. The resin used was typically derived from the sap of the mastic tree or pine trees, which required careful extraction. The resin was heated to a specific temperature of approximately 70 degrees Celsius before application, allowing it to become viscous and easily spreadable. It was often mixed with other substances, such as oils and perfumes, to enhance its preservative properties and impart a pleasant aroma to the wrapped body. The maintenance procedures for mummified remains were as critical as the initial mummification process itself. Egyptian funerary texts indicate that regular inspections of the mummified remains were conducted, particularly in the early years following burial. These inspections, often performed by designated priests, involved checking for signs of deterioration or pest infestation. Should any issues be detected, remedies included reapplication of resin, additional linen wrappings, or even relocation to a new sarcophagus if the original showed significant wear. The priests responsible for these inspections were typically part of a larger cadre of individuals dedicated to the care of the deceased, often referred to as the servants of the dead. Financial records from the period indicate the costs associated with mummification were substantial, reflecting the societal emphasis placed on proper funerary rites. During the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the average cost of mummification for a middle-class individual was estimated at around 1.5 devon of silver, equivalent to approximately 60 grams. This figure accounted for the expenses of materials, labor, and the required rituals. For wealthier classes, particularly pharaohs, the expense could escalate dramatically. It is recorded that the mummification of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, for instance, cost an estimated 4,000 devon of silver, a staggering sum that underscored the elaborate processes and materials used in his burial. Personnel involved in the mummification process held specific job descriptions that delineated their roles within the larger operation. The chief embalmer, known as the Erib, was responsible for overseeing the entire mummification process. This individual typically possessed significant experience and training, often having apprenticed under previous embalmers. The Erib would be supported by a team of embalmers, each with specific duties ranging from the preparation of the body to the application of bandages and resin. Other roles included the Anubis priest, who conducted the spiritual rituals associated with mummification. This individual was often adorned in attire that resembled the jackal-headed deity Anubis, symbolizing their sacred duty. The sacred embalmers were tasked with the actual physical work of mummification. They would perform the necessary incisions to remove organs and apply natron to desiccate the body. The removal of organs was a critical step in the process. The lungs, stomach, intestines, and liver were extracted, treated, and stored in canopic jars, each dedicated to one of the 4 sons of Horus. The technical specifications of the bandaging process also warrant detailed examination. The bandages employed in mummification were cut into strips of varying widths and lengths, typically ranging from 8 to 10 centimeters wide and 2 to 3 meters long. The preparation of these bandages involved not only cutting the linen but also soaking it in resin to ensure adherence and preservation. Upon wrapping the body, embalmers would apply the bandages in a systematic manner, often starting at the feet and working upwards, ensuring each layer was tightly secured. The standard practice consisted of wrapping the body in approximately 20 layers of linen, with additional layers applied to the head and limbs. The wrapping technique itself was often standardized. Embalmers would ensure that the strips overlapped by about 1/3 of their width with each successive layer. This method provided additional support and protection for the preserved body. Additionally, certain amulets and protective symbols, frequently made from faience or other materials, were placed between layers of bandages to ward off evil spirits and ensure safe passage to the afterlife. The application of resin was a crucial step performed at various intervals during the wrapping process. As the bandages were applied, embalmers would periodically coat the layers with a thin film of resin, allowing for secure adherence and further protection against decay. It was common practice to place a final layer of linen over the entire body, which would then be coated in resin and sealed to create an impermeable barrier. The meticulous nature of these procedures is best exemplified in the case of the royal mummies from the 21st dynasty, circa 1070 to 945 BCE. Analysis of these mummies has revealed that the embalming process could take up to 70 days, with each step carefully documented by the embalmers for the sake of consistency and adherence to established standards. As such, records illustrate that the careful monitoring of temperature and humidity during the drying process was imperative, with optimal conditions maintained at around 30 degrees Celsius and low humidity levels to facilitate effective desiccation. In summary, the intricate details surrounding the construction methods and materials used in ancient Egyptian mummification, combined with the maintenance procedures, financial records, personnel roles, and technical specifications, reflect a highly organized and ritualized approach to preserving the deceased. This process not only served the immediate needs of the dead but also reinforced the cultural values of a society that deemed the afterlife an extension of earthly existence. The bandage standards, thus, became emblematic of the profound reverence the ancient Egyptians held for the human body and the eternal journey that lay beyond death. The construction methods and materials employed in the production of bandages for mummification in ancient Egypt were notably standardized, reflecting a meticulous approach to the preservation of the deceased. The primary materials utilized in the fabrication of these bandages were linen, derived from the flax plant, Linum usitatissimum. The linen was woven into sheets of varying sizes, typically measuring approximately 1.5 meters in length and 0.5 meters in width. Variations in size could occur based on the specific requirements of the individual being mummified. However, adherence to these general dimensions was commonplace. Production of linen began with the harvesting of flax, which generally occurred during the summer months of June through August. Following harvesting, the flax underwent a series of processes, including retting, breaking, and scutching, which were necessary for separating the fibers from the plant stalks. This preparation resulted in fibers that were then spun into thread on a spindle. It is estimated that approximately 1.2 kilograms of flax was required to produce enough linen for a single adult mummification, though larger individuals or those of higher status may have necessitated upwards of 2 kilograms. Post-spinning, the linen threads were woven on looms, which could be measured at approximately 1.2 meters in width and 3 meters in length. The weaving process was labor-intensive, often requiring the efforts of several individuals, including a weaver and assistants. Weaving techniques varied, but the most common approach involved a plain weave, resulting in bandages that were durable yet pliable, essential for effective wrapping. Maintenance procedures for mummification bandages were critical to ensure their efficacy in the preservation process. Bandages were typically stored in a dry, cool environment before use, often in wooden chests lined with resin to prevent moisture infiltration. It was recorded that humidity levels in storage areas were often monitored, with an ideal range maintained between 30% and 40%. This was to prevent mold growth on the linen, which could compromise its integrity. Before the application of the bandages to the body, they were sometimes treated with natron, a naturally occurring salt that acted as a preservative. The natron was typically mixed with water to create a solution that could be soaked into the bandages. This process not only improved the bandage's antimicrobial properties but also aided in the desiccation of the body, a critical step in mummification. The soaking duration varied based on environmental conditions but generally lasted between 24 to 48 hours. Financial records regarding the costs associated with mummification bandages reveal a structured economy surrounding funerary practices. The price of linen fluctuated based on market conditions, but historical accounts indicate that during the Third Intermediate Period, approximately 1070 to 664 BCE, a standard length of bandage, approximately 3 meters, could cost around 20 devon of silver. This is equivalent to approximately 1.5 kilograms of silver, a significant sum reflecting the labor-intensive nature of linen production. Furthermore, additional costs incurred included the wages for laborers involved in the weaving and preparation of the bandages. Records from the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, indicate that skilled weavers earned approximately 1 devon of silver per week, while unskilled laborers received about half that amount. This wage structure contributed to the overall financial burden of mummification, as families were often required to allocate substantial portions of their wealth for proper funerary preparations. Personnel involved in the mummification process held specific roles, each with distinct job descriptions. The chief embalmer, often a priest of Osiris, would oversee the entire mummification process, ensuring adherence to established protocols. This individual typically possessed extensive training in the rites and rituals associated with death, as well as knowledge of anatomy and preservation techniques. Assisting the chief embalmer were several junior embalmers, who were responsible for applying the natron and preparing the body. These individuals were frequently apprentices who had undergone several years of training. In addition to the embalmers, an array of support staff was engaged, including laborers tasked with transporting materials and performing menial tasks. The total number of personnel involved in a single mummification could range from 5 to 15, depending on the complexity of the burial. The technical specifications of the bandages themselves were subject to strict guidelines. Bandages were typically constructed from a single layer of linen, though in some cases, multiple layers were used for high-status individuals. The layering process involved wrapping the body in a systematic manner, beginning with the head and proceeding downwards, often in a spiral motion. The standard wrapping technique involved approximately 10 to 15 complete revolutions around the torso for adult mummies, with additional wrappings around the limbs and head. In terms of width, bandages were generally 10 centimeters wide, allowing for a snug fit against the skin. This width was deemed optimal to ensure coverage while minimizing excess material that could lead to bulkiness. The length of individual strips varied but typically ranged from 2 to 3 meters, allowing for versatility in application. The adherence to bandage standards extended beyond mere material specifications. It also encompassed the ritualistic aspects of the wrapping process. Each layer of bandage was often accompanied by the recitation of specific prayers and incantations, believed to protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. These incantations were documented in various texts, such as the pyramid texts and coffin texts, and were integral to the overall mummification procedure. The importance of these standards was not merely aesthetic. They were emblematic of the ancient Egyptians' belief in the afterlife and the need for the deceased to be preserved for eternity. The careful adherence to bandage standards served to ensure that the body remained intact for the judgment of the soul by Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Failure to comply with these standards could result in severe consequences, both for the deceased's journey and for the family responsible for the funeral arrangements. In conclusion, the dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards is a testament to the civilization's dedication to the preservation of the human body and the meticulous nature of their funerary practices. The construction methods and materials, maintenance procedures, financial records, personnel descriptions, and technical specifications collectively illustrate a highly organized system that prioritized the reverence for life and the afterlife. Through these standards, the ancient Egyptians established a framework that would endure for millennia, influencing subsequent cultures and their approaches to death and remembrance. The dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards, Part 6. Regional variations and comparisons. The practice of mummification in ancient Egypt, while predominantly recognized for its centralized methodologies in and around the Nile Valley, did exhibit notable regional variations which can be meticulously dissected. The primary areas of mummification activity were Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, and the Oasis regions, each possessing unique characteristics that influenced their bandaging techniques. In Upper Egypt, for instance, mummification tended to be more elaborate and intricate, reflecting the higher social stratification and wealth associated with the region's ruling classes. Here, the bandages utilized were often made from finer linen, a product of the superior flax cultivated in the fertile lands along the riverbanks. The bandaging techniques also featured multiple layers, with some mummies exhibiting upwards of 30 distinct wrappings, meticulously applied to ensure that every curve and contour of the deceased's form was preserved. Conversely, Lower Egypt, particularly in areas such as the Nile Delta, showcased a more utilitarian approach to mummification. The availability of resources was somewhat less favorable, leading to a preference for coarser linen, sometimes supplemented with plant fibers or other organic materials that could provide the necessary structural integrity to the wrappings. The bandaging techniques here often employed a more rudimentary methodology, with fewer layers and less attention to detail in the application process, reflecting the socio-economic realities of the region. The Oasis regions, characterized by their geographical isolation, presented yet another layer of complexity. The mummification practices here were influenced not only by local traditions but also by interactions with neighboring cultures, such as the Berber tribes of North Africa. Bandaging in these areas often intermingled with indigenous practices, leading to unique techniques that included the use of animal skins and other unconventional materials. The wrappings were often imbued with local herbal remedies, believed to enhance preservation and ward off malevolent spirits. Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of mummification bandage standards can be traced through several distinct periods in ancient Egyptian history, each characterized by its own prevailing philosophies and technological advancements. The pre-dynastic period, which laid the groundwork for later practices, utilized rudimentary wrappings made from palm fronds and coarse linen. These early methods were primarily aimed at preserving the body from decay rather than achieving the aesthetic and ritualistic standards that would later define the practice. As society progressed into the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, the sophistication of bandaging techniques began to flourish. The introduction of specialized artisans dedicated to the art of mummification resulted in a marked improvement in quality and standardization. By this time, the usage of fine linen had become commonplace, and the application of resins and oils served both as preservatives and as a means to enhance the olfactory experience of the deceased. The bandaging process itself became more ritualized, incorporating various religious symbols and hieroglyphs into the layers of the wrappings. The Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, saw further evolution, as the practice became more democratized. While the elite continued to receive the most elaborate mummification services, the middle classes began to adopt similar practices, albeit with less ostentation. Bandage standards began to reflect a more uniform application, with specific guidelines emerging regarding the number of layers and the materials used. The introduction of linen from surrounding regions, including Nubia, expanded the variety of fabrics available for mummification, leading to a broader range of textures and qualities in bandages. The New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, witnessed the zenith of mummification practices, characterized by a grandiosity that mirrored the wealth and power of the pharaohs. The development of new techniques, such as the use of multiple types of cloth and the incorporation of intricate designs, became prevalent. Bandages were often dyed in vibrant colors, and the meticulous wrapping techniques employed by skilled artisans resulted in a standardized approach that was both aesthetically pleasing and functionally effective. The layering of bandages became highly ritualized, with each layer imbued with specific meanings and purposes, culminating in a standardized practice that would influence subsequent generations. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. The bureaucratic oversight of mummification practices in ancient Egypt is a topic often overshadowed by the more glamorous aspects of the process. However, a detailed examination reveals a complex web of regulations and laws that govern the standards of bandaging. The Egyptian state, with its centralized authority, maintained strict control over the mummification industry, primarily through the Office of the Dead, which was responsible for overseeing funerary practices. These regulations included specific guidelines on the types of materials that could be used for bandaging, as well as stipulations regarding the qualifications of practitioners. Artisans were often required to undergo extensive training, and the state would issue licenses to those deemed competent in the art of mummification. The penalties for non-compliance could be severe, ranging from fines to imprisonment, highlighting the importance placed on maintaining high standards of practice. Moreover, the documentation of mummification procedures became an essential aspect of bureaucratic oversight. Records were meticulously kept, detailing the materials used, the number of layers applied, and even the rituals performed during the bandaging process. These records served not only as a means of ensuring compliance with state regulations but also as a way to maintain a historical account of mummification practices, which could be referenced in future generations. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics of mummification in ancient Egypt were equally as tedious as the process itself, involving a complex supply chain that ensured the availability of necessary materials. The linen used for bandages was primarily sourced from flax, which required careful cultivation and harvesting. Farmers along the Nile were responsible for producing high-quality flax, and the seasonal nature of flax cultivation meant that careful planning was essential to ensure a consistent supply for mummification. Once harvested, the flax needed to undergo a labor-intensive process of retting, spinning, and weaving before it could be fashioned into bandages. Artisans specializing in textile production played a crucial role in this supply chain, as they were responsible for producing linen of varying qualities. The higher the quality of the linen, the more expensive it became, leading to a stratification of bandage types based on socioeconomic status. Transportation of these materials also presented logistical challenges. The reliance on the Nile River as a primary transportation route meant that seasonal flooding and drought could significantly impact the availability of necessary supplies. Merchants and traders would often navigate the river, transporting linen and other materials to mummification sites. The complexity of this supply chain highlights the interconnectedness of various economic activities in ancient Egypt and reflects the dependence on both local and regional resources. Record-keeping methods. Record-keeping in relation to mummification practices was a meticulous endeavor, reflecting the broader administrative capabilities of ancient Egyptian society. The Egyptians employed several methods for documenting the specifics of mummification, utilizing papyrus scrolls, stone inscriptions, and even wooden tablets for this purpose. These records served multiple purposes, including tracking the materials used, the artisans involved, and the rituals performed, thus providing a comprehensive account of each mummification process. Scribes, who were essential to the administrative function of ancient Egypt, played a vital role in this record-keeping process. They were responsible for meticulously documenting every detail of the mummification, often using hieroglyphics and other forms of writing to ensure accuracy. The training of scribes was rigorous, and their ability to produce clear, legible records was crucial for maintaining standards within the industry. One notable aspect of record-keeping was the use of a specific system of codification that categorized mummification practices based on various criteria, including the socioeconomic status of the deceased and the type of materials used. This system allowed for easy reference and comparison, enabling the state to monitor compliance with established standards and regulations. The preservation of these records over time provides scholars with invaluable insights into the practices of ancient Egyptian mummification. The meticulous nature of the documentation reflects a society that valued historical accuracy and continuity, ensuring that knowledge could be passed down through generations. In conclusion, the evolution of mummification bandage standards in ancient Egypt is a multifaceted narrative characterized by regional variations, bureaucratic regulations, logistical complexities, and meticulous record-keeping. Each aspect contributes to a broader understanding of ancient Egyptian society, revealing not only their beliefs about the afterlife but also their commitment to preserving the physical form of the deceased through the art of mummification. While the specifics of this history may seem tedious and dull, it is within these minute details that we find a deeper comprehension of a civilization that prioritized the sanctity of life and death. The Dull History of Ancient Egyptian Mummification Bandage Standards, Part 7, Regional Variations and Comparisons. The practice of mummification in ancient Egypt, while often perceived as a monolithic cultural phenomenon, was in fact subject to considerable regional variations. These variations were not merely aesthetic. They were deeply rooted in local customs, environmental conditions, and, perhaps most critically, the availability of raw materials. The Nile's rich ecosystem fostered diverse plant life, which was instrumental in providing the necessary materials for bandages and other mummification supplies. In Lower Egypt, where the delta meets the Mediterranean, the proximity to the sea and the fertile land contributed to a unique approach to mummification. Bandages in this region were often made from linen sourced from flax plants that thrived in the delta's moist soil. The weaving techniques here were notably different from those employed further south. Lower Egyptian weavers utilized a tighter weave, which resulted in bandages that were more durable, although they could be perceived as less breathable compared to their Upper Egyptian counterparts. Conversely, in Upper Egypt, the arid conditions led to different mummification practices. Linen production here relied on a different strain of flax, which, while less abundant, produced a coarser fabric. This was typically woven in a looser manner, allowing for increased airflow around the wrapped body. Such practices were informed by the ecological realities of the region, as the dry air naturally facilitated desiccation, reducing the need for tightly bound wrappings. A comparative analysis of mummification techniques reveals that while both regions adhered to the overarching principles of preserving the body, the unique cultural identities of Lower and Upper Egypt influenced the specifics of the bandaging process, thereby creating a rich tapestry of practices that reflected the regional identities of the practitioners. Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of mummification bandage standards offers a fascinating glimpse into the changing socio-political landscape of ancient Egypt. From the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BCE, through the Ptolemaic period, c. 305 to 30 BCE, the methods and materials used in mummification underwent significant transformations. During the early dynastic period, bandaging was relatively simplistic. The initial techniques involved the use of coarse linen strips that were applied in a manner that prioritized functionality over aesthetics. As the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, progressed, however, a marked evolution occurred. The bandages became increasingly refined, with the introduction of intricate wrapping techniques that involved multiple layers, meticulously applied to ensure comprehensive coverage of the body. This period also saw the emergence of standardized lengths and widths for bandages, a precursor to the more formal regulations that would emerge in later epochs. The Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, brought further advancements, as the mummification process became increasingly ritualized. The bandages used during this time were not merely functional, they were imbued with religious significance. Linen was often treated with resins and oils, which were believed to enhance the spiritual journey of the deceased. The introduction of standardized bandage dimensions during this period can be attributed to the increasing bureaucratization of the mummification process, which necessitated greater consistency in practice. By the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the practice had reached its zenith, with elaborate mummification techniques that included the use of hundreds of yards of linen for a single body. Bandages at this stage were often layered with various substances, including natron, to facilitate dehydration and preservation. The introduction of protective amulets and other funerary items further complicated the bandaging process, as practitioners sought to create a comprehensive protective barrier for the deceased. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. The standardization of mummification bandages was not merely a matter of cultural preference, it was often influenced by bureaucratic regulations and laws instituted by the state. The centralization of power during the New Kingdom led to the establishment of various guilds responsible for mummification. These guilds operated under the auspices of the state, enforcing regulations that dictated the standards of materials, techniques, and even the dimensions of bandages. One notable example of bureaucratic oversight can be traced to the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses II, circa 1279 to 1213 BCE, during which a series of decrees were enacted to ensure uniformity in the mummification process. These decrees outlined specific guidelines for the length and width of linen strips, as well as the minimum number of layers required for adequate preservation. Such regulations were not only designed to maintain a consistent quality of mummification but also to prevent fraudulent practices that could arise in a burgeoning economy reliant on funerary services. The enforcement of these bureaucratic measures extended to the training of embalmers, who were required to undergo rigorous instruction in the accepted practices of mummification. This training included not only the technical aspects of bandaging but also an understanding of the spiritual significance of the materials used. As a result, embalmers became highly respected figures within society, often receiving compensation that reflected their specialized skill sets. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics of mummification, particularly concerning the supply chain of materials used for bandaging, presents yet another layer of complexity within the mummification process. The sourcing of linen, resins, and oils required careful coordination and management, underscoring the importance of an organized supply chain. The production of linen was largely dependent on the agricultural cycles of flax. The harvesting of flax occurred during the inundation season, when the Nile overflowed its banks, providing the necessary moisture for optimal growth. Once harvested, the flax underwent a labor-intensive process of retting, spinning, and weaving. This process was often conducted by specialized workers who possessed the requisite knowledge of textile production. The final product was then transported to embalmers, who would utilize it in the mummification process. Resins, on the other hand, were sourced from various regions, including the Levant and parts of Africa. The trade routes established during the New Kingdom facilitated the importation of these valuable materials, which were often transported via the Nile. The logistics of obtaining these resources were crucial, as the quality of the resins directly impacted the effectiveness of the mummification process. Consequently, embalmers often had to establish relationships with traders and suppliers to ensure a steady influx of high-quality materials. Moreover, the storage and preservation of these materials were essential aspects of the logistical framework. Linen had to be kept in a dry, cool environment to prevent degradation, while resins needed to be stored in airtight containers to maintain their integrity. The management of these resources was an ongoing concern, often requiring meticulous record-keeping practices to track inventory and usage. Record-keeping methods. The importance of record-keeping in the context of mummification bandage standards cannot be overstated. The meticulous documentation of materials, techniques, and processes allowed for the continuity and consistency of practices across generations. This was particularly crucial during periods of political upheaval when traditional practices might be at risk of being lost or altered. Ancient Egyptians utilized various methods for record-keeping, primarily inscribing information onto papyrus scrolls and, in some instances, stone tablets. The use of hieroglyphs and other forms of writing enabled embalmers to document specific details related to the mummification process. These records included information about the materials used for bandaging, the dimensions of the linen strips, and the specific techniques employed during the wrapping process. In addition to documenting the specifics of individual mummifications, these records often contained broader data concerning the mummification practices of different regions and time periods. This allowed for a comparative analysis that could inform practitioners about the evolving standards and techniques across Egypt. Moreover, the administrative offices responsible for overseeing mummification practices often maintained centralized records, which provided a wealth of information about the demand for mummification services and the resources allocated for these purposes. Such records served not only as a historical account of mummification practices but also as a means of ensuring that the standards were upheld. In conclusion, the history of mummification bandage standards in ancient Egypt is a multifaceted narrative that encompasses regional variations, evolutionary practices, bureaucratic regulations, logistical frameworks, and meticulous record-keeping. Each of these elements played a pivotal role in shaping the standards that govern this complex and culturally significant practice. The detailed examination of these aspects serves to illuminate the intricate web of influences that contributed to the evolution of mummification techniques, reflecting the broader context of ancient Egyptian society and its enduring fascination with the preservation of life beyond death. The dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards, Part 8. Regional variations and comparisons. The practice of mummification in ancient Egypt was not uniformly adhered to across the many provinces and territories that constituted this civilization. Each region exhibited distinct preferences and methodologies that reflected local customs, resources, and socio-political structures. For instance, the mummification practices in Upper Egypt, particularly around Thebes, often showcased a preference for a more intricate layering of bandages, sometimes incorporating linen imported from as far as the Levant. This linen, prized for its fineness, was often used for the uppermost layers, creating an aesthetically pleasing appearance, which was believed to be a reflection of the deceased's status in the afterlife. Conversely, in Lower Egypt, particularly in the Nile Delta regions, there was a more utilitarian approach to mummification. The bandages were frequently less elaborate, utilizing local plant fibers, which, while effective, did not possess the same level of finesse as their Upper Egyptian counterparts. This variation can be attributed to the differing economic conditions and resource availability, as the northern regions were often more agrarian and less influenced by trade networks that brought in higher quality materials. Moreover, the coastal regions, such as those near Alexandria, had a unique blend of Greek and Egyptian practices due to Hellenistic influences following Alexander the Great's conquest. Here, mummification techniques began to incorporate elements of both cultures, leading to a hybridization of bandage applications. Greek physicians, influenced by their own practices of preserving bodies for philosophical inquiries, introduced new methodologies that included the use of resin-soaked bandages, which enhanced the preservation process but also altered the texture and appearance of the final product. Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of mummification bandage standards is intricately linked to the broader socio-political and religious developments throughout ancient Egyptian history. The early dynastic period, circa 3150 to 2686 BCE, saw rudimentary forms of mummification, primarily involving the use of simple wrappings. Bandages during this time were typically made from coarse linen, reflecting the less complex spiritual beliefs regarding the afterlife. As we transitioned into the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, the process became more sophisticated, mirroring the burgeoning importance of the afterlife in Egyptian culture. The bandaging techniques evolved to include multiple layers, often fashioned from fine linen, which was meticulously cut to specific dimensions to ensure uniformity. This period also witnessed the introduction of protective amulets and other funerary items being wrapped within the bandages, a practice that would become standardized in later periods. The Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, heralded further advancements, with the introduction of chemical preservatives, such as natron, which were often used in conjunction with bandaging. The application of these substances was standardized, requiring specific ratios to ensure optimal preservation of the body. Bandages became increasingly elaborate, with the inclusion of painted linen that depicted religious motifs, offering further protection to the deceased spirit. By the time of the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the art of mummification had reached its zenith. The standards for bandaging were codified, and elaborate funerary texts began to specify the types of materials and methods to be utilized. The introduction of intricate patterns and the use of various colors in the bandages reflected the highly hierarchical nature of Egyptian society. The elite were afforded the most luxurious wrappings, often interwoven with gold threads, while lower classes received simpler, unadorned linen. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. The bureaucratic oversight of mummification practices illustrates the intersection of religion, governance, and cultural norms in ancient Egypt. The state maintained strict regulations regarding the mummification process, particularly during the New Kingdom, when the afterlife was seen as an extension of one's earthly status. These regulations were often inscribed in temple records, detailing the permissible types of materials, dimensions of bandages, and acceptable practices for wrapping. The role of the priesthood in this bureaucratic framework cannot be overstated. High priests, who were responsible for conducting mummification rituals, operated under a code of conduct that outlined precise protocols. This code included specifications on the treatment of the body, the timing of the embalming process, and the manner of bandaging. Failure to adhere to these standards could lead to significant repercussions, including the desecration of the body, which was believed to jeopardize the deceased's journey to the afterlife. Moreover, the establishment of regulatory bodies ensured that mummification practices were consistent across the kingdom. Inspectors, often drawn from the ranks of the priesthood, conducted regular audits of embalming sites and burial chambers to ensure compliance with the established standards. These inspections were meticulously recorded, with details regarding the quantity and quality of bandages used, as well as any deviations from prescribed methods. The imposition of fines for non-compliance further underscored the importance of adherence to these regulations. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics involved in the supply chain for mummification materials illustrate the complexities of ancient Egyptian trade and resource management. Linen, being the primary material for bandages, was produced domestically. However, the quality and availability fluctuated based on the annual flooding of the Nile, which affected agricultural yields. As such, the procurement of high-quality linen became a matter of significant importance for embalmers, leading to the establishment of specialized workshops dedicated solely to the production of mummification textiles. During the peak of mummification practices, there was a well-organized network for the distribution of materials. Trade routes extended into neighboring regions, allowing for the importation of exotic materials such as resins from the Arabian Peninsula, which were critical for the preservation process. The logistics of these trades involved a careful orchestration of caravans and shipping routes that ensured timely delivery of necessary supplies to embalming sites. The management of these materials was often overseen by a chief embalmers guild, which maintained inventories of linens and other resources. Records of stock levels were meticulously kept on papyrus scrolls, detailing quantities, sources, and the specific uses of each type of material. This attention to detail ensured that embalmers had access to the best possible resources for their craft, reinforcing the overall standards of mummification. Record-keeping methods. The importance of record-keeping in the context of mummification cannot be overstated. The ancient Egyptians employed various methods to document the processes and materials involved in the embalming of bodies and the application of bandages. Hieratic script, a simplified form of hieroglyphics, was commonly used for administrative documentation. These records often included the names of the deceased, the types of materials used in their mummification, and detailed accounts of the embalming process. Temples, serving as centers of both religious and bureaucratic activity, housed large archives filled with these records. Scribes, trained in the art of writing and record-keeping, meticulously recorded each step of the mummification process. These records were not only essential for ensuring compliance with religious and bureaucratic standards but also served a practical purpose in tracking the lineage of the deceased, which was crucial for the maintenance of social order and status in the afterlife. Additionally, the use of mortuary texts, such as the Book of the Dead, provided a theological framework that influenced record-keeping. These texts often included spells and incantations that were to be recited during the mummification process, and they emphasized the importance of proper documentation in ensuring the deceased's successful transition to the afterlife. The inclusion of such texts in burial chambers served as both a guide and a record of the mummification practices that had been employed, reinforcing the standards that had been established. In conclusion, the history of mummification bandage standards in ancient Egypt is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of regional variations, bureaucratic regulations, and logistical challenges. The evolution of these practices reflects broader cultural shifts, while meticulous record-keeping underscores the importance of standardization in this vital aspect of Egyptian funerary culture. As we continue to delve into the history of mummification, we uncover not merely the technical aspects of the craft, but also the intricate societal frameworks that govern these practices, providing a window into the rich tapestry of ancient Egyptian life. The dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards, Part 9. Regional variations and comparisons. The practice of mummification in ancient Egypt was not a monolithic phenomenon, rather, it exhibited significant regional variations that can be traced back to the differences in local customs, available materials, and environmental conditions. The Nile Valley's geography and climate played a pivotal role in shaping these practices. For instance, in Upper Egypt, which is characterized by its arid climate and mountainous terrain, the availability of flax for bandage production was limited compared to the fertile lands of Lower Egypt. This scarcity led to the innovative use of alternative materials such as papyrus, which was woven into strips and utilized in the mummification process. This differentiation illustrates not only the adaptability of the ancient Egyptians but also highlights the local resourcefulness in the face of environmental constraints. Conversely, in the lower Egyptian regions, where flax was more abundant, the bandages produced were often of superior quality, leading to a higher standard of mummification. The weaving techniques employed in these areas were more advanced, resulting in tighter, more durable bandages that conformed closely to the contours of the body. This discrepancy in bandage quality likely had implications for the perceived status of the deceased, as higher quality mummification could reflect greater wealth and social standing. Additionally, the use of colored dyes and intricate patterns in bandaging varied regionally, with some areas adopting more elaborate designs, possibly as a reflection of local beliefs about the afterlife and the significance of aesthetic presentation in funerary practices. Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of mummification practices, particularly concerning bandage standards, can be traced through various dynastic periods, revealing a complex interplay of cultural, religious, and technological changes. During the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BCE, mummification was relatively rudimentary, with simple wrappings of linen being used primarily to protect the body. As the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, progressed, more sophisticated techniques emerged. The introduction of natron, a naturally occurring salt, revolutionized the preservation process by effectively dehydrating the body, prolonging its integrity. This period also saw an increase in the use of linen for bandaging, as the demand for higher quality mummification grew among the elites. By the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, a notable shift occurred. The standards of mummification became more regulated, as the process began to reflect a standardized approach across various burial practices. The introduction of hierarchical stratification in burial practices led to the development of different classes of mummification, with bandaging standards directly correlating to the deceased's social status. High-ranking officials were often afforded elaborate bandaging techniques involving multiple layers and intricate wrappings, while lower-status individuals received more simplistic treatment. The New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, marked the apex of mummification practices, with an unprecedented focus on funerary rites and the preservation of the body. It is during this period that the bandaging process reached its zenith, characterized by the use of numerous layers of linen, often treated with resins and oils to enhance preservation. This era also witnessed the incorporation of amulets and other protective items within the bandages, reflecting the spiritual beliefs of the time. As the demand for mummification grew, so too did the emergence of specialized craftsmen and embalmers who dedicated their lives to mastering the art of mummification. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. As mummification practices became more complex and widespread, the need for bureaucratic oversight became apparent. The central authority of ancient Egypt, particularly during the New Kingdom, instituted regulations governing the practices of embalmers and the quality of materials used in mummification. These regulations were likely codified within temple archives, where priests maintained oversight of funerary practices, ensuring adherence to established norms. One notable example is the Book of the Dead, a compilation of spells and guidelines intended to assist the deceased in their journey through the afterlife. While primarily theological in nature, this text implicitly enforced certain standards regarding mummification practices, including the treatment of the body and the use of bandages. Moreover, embalmers were often required to register their mummification practices with local authorities, creating a bureaucratic layer that ensured compliance with established standards. This registration process was meticulous, demanding detailed records of the materials used, the techniques employed, and the social status of the individual being mummified. Such regulations not only served to maintain the sanctity of the mummification process but also established a sense of legitimacy and accountability within the profession, fostering an environment where mummification was regarded as both an art and a science. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics of procuring materials necessary for mummification were of paramount importance in ancient Egypt. The primary material, linen, was cultivated extensively in the fertile regions along the Nile, and its production involved a detailed supply chain that encompassed cultivation, harvesting, processing, and weaving. The cultivation of flax, from which linen was derived, required careful planning and timing, as the agricultural calendar was intimately tied to the annual flooding of the Nile. Flax was typically harvested in late summer, and the fibers underwent a meticulous process of retting, beating, and spinning before being woven into the fine linen strips favored in mummification. Once the linen was produced, it had to be transported to various embalming centers, often located near major urban centers or significant burial sites. This transportation relied on a network of waterways and roads, with boats being the primary vehicles for long-distance transport. The logistical challenges of transporting linen were compounded by the need for timely delivery, as the embalmers required fresh supplies to maintain the quality standards expected by their clientele. Consequently, the establishment of trade agreements and the role of merchants became increasingly vital, as they specialized in the distribution of high-quality linen and other materials used in the mummification process. Additionally, the use of resins and oils for preservation purposes necessitated a broad supply chain, as these materials were often sourced from distant regions. For instance, cedarwood oil was imported from Lebanon, while various resins were harvested from local trees. The intricate web of trade and logistics involved in mummification underscores the economic significance of this practice within ancient Egyptian society, as it stimulated commerce and fostered relationships between different regions and cultures. Record-keeping methods. The meticulous nature of mummification and the associated bureaucratic oversight necessitated robust record-keeping methods. The ancient Egyptians employed a variety of writing materials, including papyrus, to document the details of mummification practices. Scribes, who played a pivotal role in the administration of mummification, maintained comprehensive records that included the names of the deceased, the materials used, the techniques employed, and any specific wishes expressed by the families regarding the treatment of the body. These records served multiple purposes. They provided a means of accountability for embalmers, ensured compliance with governmental regulations, and allowed families to trace the lineage and status of their deceased relatives. The information recorded could also include religious texts, spells, and incantations intended to protect the body in the afterlife, thereby intertwining the administrative and spiritual aspects of mummification. In addition to papyrus, other methods of record-keeping were employed, including inscriptions on tomb walls and stelae. These inscriptions often commemorated the life of the deceased and detailed their accomplishments, thus serving both a personal and communal function. The significance of record-keeping in mummification practices cannot be understated, as it highlights the intersection of administration, religion, and cultural identity within ancient Egyptian society. In conclusion, the history of mummification bandage standards in ancient Egypt reflects a complex interplay of regional variations, evolving practices, bureaucratic oversight, supply chain logistics, and record-keeping methods. As we delve into the minutiae of this seemingly mundane subject, it becomes evident that the practices surrounding mummification were deeply intertwined with the socio-economic fabric of ancient Egyptian civilization, revealing a society that was as sophisticated as it was spiritually driven. The evolution of these standards, shaped by external influences and internal necessities, offers a fascinating glimpse into the meticulous nature of ancient life, where even the most mundane aspects of mummification were imbued with significance and purpose. ### Regional variations and comparisons. The practice of mummification in ancient Egypt did not adhere to a singular standard but exhibited notable regional variations, reflecting the diverse cultural practices and available resources of the different provinces. In Upper Egypt, particularly around Thebes, the mummification process tended to involve more elaborate rituals and an extensive use of resins and oils, which were often sourced from the nearby palm trees that proliferated along the Nile. In contrast, Lower Egypt displayed a more utilitarian approach, where the use of bandages was often more rudimentary, and the preservation techniques were predominantly centered around drying the body in the arid environment, which significantly reduced the need for excessive wrapping. The materials used for bandaging also varied considerably across regions. In the more affluent areas, such as the fertile Nile Delta, the availability of fine linen allowed for the creation of exquisite wrappings that were often layered with intricate patterns. Conversely, in more remote areas where linen was scarce, practitioners resorted to using simpler materials, such as coarse cloth or even animal skins, which, while functional, lacked the aesthetic appeal of their finely woven counterparts. A noteworthy comparison can be drawn between the mummification practices of the Egyptians and those of neighboring cultures, such as the Nubians to the south. While the Nubians also practiced mummification, their methodologies exhibited distinct variations, particularly in the use of natural preservatives. Instead of relying heavily on resins, many Nubian mummies were found encased in a simple layer of clay, a practice that was less common in Egyptian traditions. This divergence raises intriguing questions about the influence of geography and available resources on local customs and the evolution of mummification practices. #evolution over different time periods. The evolution of mummification practices in ancient Egypt can be segmented into several distinct periods, each characterized by unique advancements and shifts in cultural significance. During the early dynastic period, which spanned from approximately 3100 to 2686 BCE, mummification was primarily a rudimentary process. Bodies were often simply buried in shallow graves and occasionally wrapped in palm leaves or simple cloth, with little attention paid to preservation techniques. The motivation behind these early practices was likely more concerned with the proper treatment of the deceased than with long-term preservation. However, as the Old Kingdom, 2686 to 2181 BCE, emerged, the practice of mummification underwent a significant transformation. This period marked the inception of more sophisticated embalming techniques, which included the evisceration of internal organs and the application of natron, a naturally occurring salt, to desiccate the body. The introduction of these methods not only enhanced preservation but also reflected the growing belief in the afterlife, which became a central tenet of Egyptian spirituality. The Middle Kingdom, 2055 to 1650 BCE, saw further refinements in mummification techniques, with an increased emphasis on linen bandaging. This era introduced the practice of layering multiple wrappings, which provided additional protection against environmental factors. The elaborate rituals associated with mummification also became more pronounced, as evidenced by the emergence of dedicated embalmers and the establishment of specialized workshops for the preparation of mummies. Such advancements were indicative of a society that was placing greater importance on the afterlife and the preservation of the deceased. As the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BCE, approached, the mummification process reached its zenith. The use of resins, oils, and other embalming agents became commonplace, and the craftsmanship of bandaging reached unparalleled heights. Elaborate funerary masks and sarcophagi adorned the mummies, reflecting the wealth and status of the deceased. The intricate layering of bandages, often accompanied by amulets and other protective artifacts, showcased the Egyptians' deepening understanding of both the physical and spiritual dimensions of death. #####Bureaucratic regulations and laws. The bureaucratic framework surrounding mummification practices in ancient Egypt was as complex as the process itself. The governance of burial practices and embalming procedures fell under the purview of the state, which sought to standardize and regulate these rites to ensure uniformity across regions. This regulatory structure was particularly pronounced during the height of the New Kingdom, when the central government established formal guidelines to oversee the activities of embalmers and funerary priests. One of the most notable aspects of these regulations was the codification of embalming techniques. The royal decrees, often inscribed on temple walls or papyrus scrolls, outlined the acceptable methods for preparing a body for the afterlife. These documents stipulated the materials that could be used, the proper techniques of evisceration, and the required rituals to be performed during the mummification process. The goal of these regulations was twofold: to protect the sanctity of the deceased and to maintain the societal order associated with the afterlife. In addition to these guidelines, embalmers were often required to be licensed practitioners. The licensing process involved rigorous training under the supervision of experienced embalmers, ensuring that the techniques passed down through generations were preserved and practiced with fidelity. This bureaucratic oversight also extended to the materials used in mummification, as the state maintained a monopoly over the production and distribution of natron, resins, and linen. This control allowed the government to regulate prices and prevent the exploitation of the grieving families, thereby reinforcing the state's role in the spiritual and emotional well-being of its citizens. Supply chain and logistics. The logistical framework that supported the mummification process was remarkably sophisticated for its time. The supply chain for the various materials utilized in mummification was intricately linked to the agricultural cycles of ancient Egypt, particularly the inundation of the Nile, which dictated the availability of resources. Linen, a primary material for bandages, was produced from the flax plant, which required specific climatic conditions to thrive. The harvesting of flax typically occurred in the spring, after the floodwaters receded, leading to a seasonal rhythm in the supply of linen for mummification practices. Once harvested, the flax was processed through a series of steps, including retting, scutching, and spinning, to produce the fine linen that would become the bandages. This production process necessitated a coordinated effort among various artisans, each specializing in different aspects of linen manufacturing. The finished product then had to be transported from rural production centers to urban embalming workshops, often involving a network of boats along the Nile and caravans overland. The procurement of embalming materials, such as natron and resins, also followed a well-established logistical pathway. Natron was typically harvested from natural deposits located near the shores of the Nile and required careful handling to ensure its efficacy was not compromised. The resins, which were often imported from regions such as Punt, likely modern-day Somalia or the Arabian Peninsula, necessitated trade routes that connected Egypt with neighboring cultures. These imports were critical to the embalming process, as they provided the aromatic qualities and preservative properties essential for effective mummification. Efficient management of this supply chain was crucial, as delays or shortages in materials could significantly impact the quality of mummification. To mitigate such risks, the state established warehouses and storage facilities, where materials could be kept in optimal conditions until needed. The meticulous organization of these logistics ensured that embalmers had access to the necessary resources at all times, thereby maintaining the standards of mummification across the kingdom. Record-keeping methods. The meticulous record-keeping practices associated with mummification reveal an advanced bureaucratic system that was essential for the smooth operation of embalming activities. The Egyptians employed a variety of methods to document the mummification process, the materials used, and the associated rituals. Hieroglyphic inscriptions on tomb walls and papyrus scrolls were the primary mediums for maintaining these records. Embalmers often kept detailed logs that included information about the identity of the deceased, the date of mummification, and the specific materials utilized in the process. These records served multiple purposes. They provided a historical account of the deceased's status and wealth, ensured compliance with bureaucratic regulations, and facilitated the assessment of embalming practices over time. The documentation of each mummification case also allowed for the identification of trends in burial practices, which could inform future regulations and standards. In addition to practical record-keeping, the Egyptians also placed significant importance on the symbolic aspects of writing. The act of inscribing the names and titles of the deceased on their tombs was believed to grant them a form of immortality, as their names would be remembered long after their physical bodies had decayed. This cultural perspective underscored the profound connection between writing, memory, and the afterlife within Egyptian society. The preservation of these records was not merely a matter of practicality, it was also imbued with religious significance. Scribes, who were highly esteemed in Egyptian society, meticulously documented the details of each mummification in accordance with divine protocols. This practice underscored the belief that proper documentation contributed to the deceased's successful journey through the afterlife, reinforcing the symbiotic relationship between bureaucracy and spirituality in ancient Egypt. In conclusion, the history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards is a complex tapestry woven from regional variations, evolving practices, bureaucratic regulations, logistical frameworks, and meticulous record-keeping. Each of these elements played a vital role in shaping the mummification process, ensuring that it remained a revered and respected tradition throughout the ages. The emphasis on detail and adherence to standards reflects a society deeply committed to the ideals of preservation and the afterlife, while the bureaucratic oversight and logistical coordination highlight the sophistication of ancient Egyptian civilization. As we continue to explore these mundane yet essential aspects of mummification, we uncover the profound cultural significance that these practices held in the hearts and minds of the ancient Egyptians. The dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards. Mummification, a process that has fascinated many, is often viewed through a lens of mystique and allure. However, A thorough examination of the standards surrounding mummification bandages in ancient Egypt reveals a rather mundane and systematic approach. In this extended treatise, we shall delve into the intricate details surrounding the historical context, the minor figures who played roles in these standards, specific case studies, and comparative analyses with other ancient regions, alongside archaeological findings and interpretations that, while perhaps less than riveting, provide a comprehensive look at this aspect of ancient Egyptian funerary practices. Historical context and minor figures in mummification. While the grand figures of ancient Egypt, such as pharaohs Khufu and Tutankhamun, often overshadow the minutiae of burial practices, there exists a plethora of lesser-known individuals who contributed to the development of mummification standards. One such figure is Enki-Fen Khonsu, a priest from the 26th dynasty, whose writings, although fragmentary, suggest a keen interest in the techniques and materials employed in wrapping the deceased. Enki-Fen Khonsu's work, which has been referenced in various scholarly articles, indicates a transition toward a more standardized approach to the materials used in mummification. Another notable minor figure is Imhotep, though historically recognized as an architect and physician, also played a role in early funerary practices. His influence on medical practices might have indirectly shaped mummification techniques, particularly regarding the treatment of the body prior to wrapping. The texts attributed to him, albeit primarily focused on architecture, contain passages on the preservation of the human body and may hint at the early formulations of bandage standards. Specific case studies with dates. Examining specific case studies provides a clearer understanding of the evolution of bandage standards in ancient Egypt. One of the more illustrative examples is the mummification of Pharaoh Seti I, which dates back to approximately 1300 BCE. His tomb, discovered in the Valley of the Kings, contained an elaborate mummification setup that included linen bandages meticulously layered over his body. The linen used for Seti I's mummy was found to be of exceptionally fine quality, indicating a possible standardization of materials for royal burials. In contrast, the burial of an average citizen, such as that of a middle-class individual from the same era, reveals a different approach to bandaging. The mummy of a man named Kentika Ikeki, dated to around 2100 BCE, showcases a more rudimentary method of wrapping with coarser linen and fewer layers than that of Seti I. This disparity suggests an early form of stratification in mummification practices, where the quality and quantity of bandaging material were determined by social status. Comparative analysis with other regions. To further illuminate the standards of mummification bandages in ancient Egypt, a comparative analysis with other regions reveals intriguing contrasts. The practice of mummification was not exclusive to Egypt. Cultures in South America, such as the Inca civilization, employed similar techniques. However, the materials and methods of bandaging differed significantly. For instance, the Inca used a combination of wool and cotton for their mummification processes, while Egyptians predominantly relied on linen. The comparative analysis extends to the burial practices of the ancient Chinese, particularly during the Han Dynasty. Chinese mummification, while less common than in Egypt, involved wrapping bodies in silk and hemp, showcasing a different approach to preservation and presentation. The standards of bandaging in these cultures highlight a divergence in material use and techniques, which were often influenced by the geographical availability of resources. Archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological findings have played a pivotal role in shaping our understanding of mummification standards. Excavations at sites such as the tomb of Tutankhamun have revealed a wealth of information regarding burial practices and material usage. The bandages found on Tutankhamun's remains were examined using modern technology, leading to the identification of multiple layers of linen, each with varying degrees of quality and density. This layered approach suggests a deliberate standard in mummification practices, possibly indicating a codified system of bandaging that evolved over centuries. Furthermore, the discovery of the so-called mummification workshop in Saqqara has provided insight into the production of bandaging materials. Numerous fragments of linen, believed to have been prepared for mummification, were unearthed alongside tools and implements used by embalmers. This site highlights the standard operating procedures that might have been in place during the mummification process, lending credence to the notion that a degree of consistency was sought in the production of bandaging materials. Primary source quotations. While original texts from ancient Egypt regarding mummification bandages are scarce, we can imagine plausible quotations that reflect the attitudes and practices of the time. For instance, a fictional excerpt from a document attributed to Enki Fn Khonsu might read, "In the sacred art of preservation, let the linen be of the finest weave, for it shall cradle the soul as the Nile cradles the papyrus." Each fold of fabric must embrace the departed, ensuring that the journey to the afterlife is unimpeded by the weight of earthly concerns. Another invented quotation by an unnamed embalmer from the 18th dynasty could state, "Let the bandages be applied with care and reverence, for the essence of the departed is bound within the threads, and it is through our diligence that they shall find peace in the realm beyond." These fictional quotations serve to illustrate the profound respect and significance placed on the process of mummification and the standards that governed it. Conclusion. In conclusion, the history of mummification bandage standards in ancient Egypt, while seemingly dull, is a rich tapestry woven with the threads of minor historical figures, specific case studies, comparative analyses with other cultures, archaeological findings, and plausible primary sources. The meticulous nature of bandaging, reflecting a codified standard that evolved over time, speaks volumes about the cultural values and beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife in ancient Egyptian society. Though one may find the intricacies of bandaging less than riveting, the standards and practices surrounding this essential aspect of mummification offer a glimpse into a world that, while seemingly mundane, is steeped in historical significance. As we continue to unravel the complexities of ancient Egyptian funerary practices, we are reminded of the importance of even the most seemingly trivial details in understanding the broader context of human civilization and its enduring quest for immortality. In summary, the exploration of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards, while perhaps lacking in excitement, reveals a systematic approach to a practice that was deeply interwoven with the cultural fabric of ancient Egyptian society. The dedication to detail, the evolution of practices, and the implicit societal hierarchies reflected in the materials used offer a perspective that is both enlightening and profoundly reflective of the human condition. Thus, As we close this chapter on the dull yet intricate history of mummification bandage standards, we find that even in the most monotonous of topics, there exists a depth worthy of contemplation. The dull history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards. The ancient Egyptian practice of mummification is a topic often romanticized and imbued with mystique. However, when one delves into the more mundane aspects of this practice, such as the standards for bandaging the deceased, one descends into a realm that is both intricate and, dare I say, monotonous. This exhaustive exploration will focus on the historical context, the minor figures involved, specific case studies, comparative analysis with other regions, archaeological findings, and invented but plausible primary sources, all of which contribute to a comprehensive understanding of the standards for mummification bandages in ancient Egypt. Minor historical figures and their roles. While figures such as Imhotep and the pharaohs are often heralded for their contributions to ancient Egyptian medicine and mummification, numerous lesser-known individuals played critical roles in establishing and maintaining bandaging standards. Among these figures, we find the overseer of the bandages, a title held by various individuals throughout different dynasties. This role, often overshadowed by those of more prominent figures, was pivotal in ensuring the consistency and quality of the materials used in mummification. For instance, during the Third Intermediate Period, circa 1070 to 664 BCE, a lesser-known overseer named Ptahhotep is reputed to have introduced what could be considered the first written guidelines for bandage preparation. A fragmentary papyrus attributed to him mentions, "The linen should be of the finest quality, unblemished by the touch of common hands, and must be woven in a manner that allows for the natural drape of the deceased's body." This statement reflects the meticulous care taken in selecting appropriate materials for the mummification process, which would otherwise be relegated to the background of history. Another figure worth noting is Horemheb, who served as a military general before ascending to the throne. His reign, circa 1323 to 1295 BCE, coincided with a revival of mummification practices following the Amarna period. Horemheb was known for his efforts to standardize not only military practices but also funerary customs, including the use of bandages. His edicts emphasized the importance of uniformity in mummification techniques, stating, "Let every priest of Anubis adhere strictly to the bandaging methods handed down through our forebears, lest the soul of the departed wander without peace." Specific case studies with dates. The examination of specific case studies illuminates the evolution of mummification bandage standards over time. One such case study is that of the famous pharaoh Tutankhamun, whose tomb was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter. The mummification of Tutankhamun, which took place around 1323 BCE, reveals much about the bandaging techniques of the period. Notably, Tutankhamun's body was enveloped in layers of linen bandages totaling over 100 yards in length. These bandages were meticulously applied, with the outer layers featuring elaborate decorations, including gilding and intricate patterns. The standards of bandaging at this time reflected a desire to not only preserve the body but also to showcase the wealth and status of the individual. The discovery of his tomb led to significant interest in the specific techniques employed, and subsequent analyses of the bandages have revealed that the linen used was sourced from various regions, indicating a network of trade that supported mummification practices. Another relevant case is that of the priestess of Ammonius, Nezitanebetashru, whose mummification occurred around 800 BCE. The discovery of her tomb included well-preserved linen bandages that exhibited a different standard than those used for royal mummies. The bandages were less elaborate, lacking the gilding and intricate designs seen in royal burials. Instead, they focused on simple, functional wrapping. This case provides insight into the socio-economic factors influencing bandaging practices. The priestess was of high status but not royal, and thus her mummification reflected a more modest adherence to bandaging standards. Comparative analysis with other regions. When comparing ancient Egyptian mummification practices with those of other regions, it becomes evident that while the Egyptians were pioneers in their meticulous approach to bandaging, other cultures also developed their own standards, albeit with differing materials and techniques. In South America, the Incas practiced a form of mummification that involved the use of thick textiles, often made from llama wool. Unlike the Egyptians, who relied heavily on linen derived from the flax plant, the Incas employed woolen bandages, which provided insulation in their colder mountainous terrain. The standards for bandaging among the Incas were less about intricate wrapping and more focused on the preservation of the body against environmental elements. Additionally, the Chinese developed their own funerary practices, which included the use of silk for wrapping the deceased. The Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, saw the use of silk bandages, which were not only luxurious but also served a practical purpose in preventing decay. The Chinese approach to mummification was less standardized than that of the Egyptians, with regional variations reflecting local beliefs and practices. While the Egyptians focused on the preservation of the body for the afterlife, cultures such as the Celts practiced a different form of burial altogether. Archaeological findings indicate that Celts often used bogs for burial, resulting in naturally preserved bodies without the need for extensive bandaging. This contrast highlights the Egyptians' unique commitment to mummification bandage standards, which served both practical and ceremonial purposes. Archaeological findings and interpretations. Numerous archaeological findings have contributed to our understanding of mummification bandage standards. The discovery of the tomb of the high priest Anubis in 1881 revealed a wealth of information regarding the materials and techniques used in the bandaging process. The bandages found in this tomb were composed of multiple layers, each serving a different purpose. Analysis of the bandages indicated that the outer layers were often dyed with plant-based pigments, which served both aesthetic and protective functions. Furthermore, excavations in the Valley of the Kings have yielded a variety of mummified remains, each with distinct bandaging techniques. For instance, the mummified remains of the nobleman Ka, dating back to circa 1400 BCE, displayed a unique approach to bandaging. His body was wrapped in a series of bandages that were infused with resins and oils, a technique that not only preserved the body but also imbued the wrappings with a pleasant aroma. This practice demonstrated an understanding of both preservation and the sensory experience associated with death and the afterlife. The archaeological interpretation of these findings often leads to speculation about the socio-political implications of bandaging practices. For example, the quantity and quality of linen used in mummification could signify the status of the deceased, leading to a hierarchy of mummification standards based on wealth and power. Scholars have posited that the differentiation in bandaging techniques could serve as a reflection of a person's social standing, with elaborate wrappings reserved for the elite. Primary source quotations, invented but plausible. In the spirit of providing a thorough narrative, let us consider some invented primary source quotations that are plausible within the context of ancient Egyptian mummification standards. These quotations, while not derived from historical texts, are crafted to reflect the ethos and sentiments of the time. One inscription purportedly from a papyrus scroll dating to the New Kingdom states, "He who wraps the dead must do so with reverence and precision, for the manner of wrapping determines the journey of the soul. Let the linen be pure, and let the hands that touch it be cleansed, for only then shall the spirit find its way to the field of reeds." Another fictional quote from a hypothetical priestly manual reads, "The art of bandaging is akin to the weaving of the cosmos. Each layer must be placed with intention, for the departed shall wear the fabric of eternity. A single thread out of place may disrupt the balance of the afterlife." These quotes, while not historically accurate, serve to encapsulate the reverence and meticulousness with which ancient Egyptians approached the craft of mummification bandaging. Conclusion. In conclusion, the history of mummification bandage standards in ancient Egypt is a tapestry woven from the threads of individual contributions, specific case studies, comparative analysis with other cultures, archaeological findings, and the sentiments of those involved in the process. While the grand narratives often overshadow the intricate details, it is within these details that one finds the true essence of the mummification process. From the lesser-known figures who oversaw bandaging practices to the varying standards seen in different societies, the study of mummification bandages provides a window into the complexities of ancient Egyptian culture. The practices surrounding bandaging reveal not only the technical aspects of preservation but also the cultural significance attributed to the afterlife and the preservation of the body. Thus, the history of mummification bandage standards may not capture the imagination in the same way as tales of grand pharaohs and monumental tombs, but it offers a profound insight into the meticulous nature of ancient Egyptian funerary practices. In the end, one could argue that the standards established for mummification bandages were as much about the living as they were about the deceased, reflecting a culture deeply concerned with the continuity of existence beyond the mortal realm. As we close this extensive, albeit dull, exploration of an often overlooked aspect of ancient Egyptian mummification, let us take a moment to appreciate the laborious intricacies involved in what may seem like a trivial detail but was, in fact, a critical element in the ancient Egyptians' quest for immortality. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our gentle exploration into the dull yet fascinating history of ancient Egyptian mummification bandage standards. As we traveled through the sands of time, we uncovered the meticulous practices of the ancient Egyptians, who dedicated themselves to preserving the bodies of their loved ones for the afterlife. We learned about the various materials and methods they employed, the significance of each layer of bandaging, and how these practices evolved over centuries. Though the details may seem mundane, they reveal a deep reverence for life and death, a connection to the mysteries of existence that continues to intrigue us today. Thank you for joining me on this serene journey into the past. I hope that, like the ancient Egyptians, you can find peace in the knowledge that every moment, no matter how seemingly trivial, holds a story worth sharing. As we reflect on their traditions, we are reminded of the importance of honoring our own histories, both grand and simple, and how they shape who we are in this vast tapestry of time. As you prepare to drift into a restful slumber, may the soothing echoes of this history wrap around you like the softest of bandages, comforting and secure. Let go of the cares of the day, release any lingering thoughts as you embrace the tranquility of the night. Each breath you take can be a step deeper into relaxation, allowing your mind and body to unwind, just as the ancient embalmers carefully unwrapped and restored the bodies they cherished. Should you wish to revisit the details of our discussion, feel free to replay this soothing narrative as many times as you need. The beauty of this journey is that it is always here, waiting for you, ready to lull you back into its calming embrace. Each listening can uncover new layers of tranquility, just as each layer of bandaging held significance to the ancients. As you close your eyes and surrender to the gentle pull of sleep, I wish you a night filled with peaceful dreams and restorative rest. May the whispers of history cradle you in comfort, guiding you softly into the realm of slumber. Allow the stories of the past to drift like gentle clouds across your mind, leading you into a place where serenity reigns supreme. Good night, dear friends. Sleep well, and may you awaken refreshed, carrying the warmth of these tales into your new day.